great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you were really great and powerful, you'd keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now.
Oh.
The great Oz has spoken.
Oh.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
All right, I love that scene. If you guys have seen the movie, then you're familiar with it. That wizard, kind of in quotation marks, as the wizard says, "Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain." And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about pulling back the curtain, because here's just the reality of life. Some of us don't think about this on a regular basis, and I actually answer a lot of questions that people have based on this whole idea. Is that there are actually three wills at work in the world, and we sometimes attribute everything to God, right? Something good happens, we say, "Thank you, God." Something bad happens, we say, "Why, God?" And so the truth is that there are three wills at work in the world. There's the will of God, and then there is also the will of evil, and then there's the will of men, right? And so in any situation, we have to stop and figure out, first of all, who's behind this? Is this God at work? Is this our enemy at work? Or is this my own just amazing ability to get myself into trouble, right? And so there's always three wills at work. And so a lot of times I think the problem we have is that when something bad happens, we assume God did this, when the truth is Scripture tells us that we have an enemy who comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. So I want to set that from the beginning, is that there's three wills at work. There's ours, and there's two, and the other two take place behind a curtain, right? And so there is a curtain that divides the eternal reality from our current temporal reality. And so we pay a lot of attention as Christians within the church to the good will at work behind the curtain, the will of our Father in heaven, but we don't pay as much attention to the fact that there is another person behind this curtain at work. And so our enemy would like nothing more than what that video said. He would like nothing more than for you to shuffle through life paying no attention to the man behind the curtain. So that's what we're going to talk about, is that we have an enemy. Our enemy is bent on our destruction. Our enemy works from behind the curtain, right? And from back there, his whole effort is to disguise what's really going on. And that's what the wizard was trying to do. He was twisting levers and pulling knobs and trying to do all this stuff, trying to distract from what was really going on. And that is still the work of our enemy today, behind the curtain, trying to do all these things, keeping you from paying attention to what's actually going on. And because of that, sometimes because of that, when he's successful in his efforts, what happens is that we are ignorant to his work behind the curtain, and then we end up playing right into his schemes. And so that's what we're going to talk about. In 1 Peter 5:8, it says this: "Be alert and sober-minded," or of a sober mind. "Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." Now, here's the thing. Sometimes we overcomplicate this when we start talking about things that we call spiritual warfare, and we go way further than what Scripture goes. And so right here, the answer to this is really simple, and it's pay attention. It's be sober-minded, be alert, because there is this thing going on behind the curtain. So the first point, and what we'll come back to at the end, the most significant point of today is this. The most significant step that we can take in defeating our enemy is to pull back the curtain and pay attention. The most significant step we can take in defeating our enemy is to pull back the curtain and pay attention. And so I just want to briefly for a minute dwell on the state of mind that Peter is promoting here. He's promoting a certain state of mind in us as we do this. He's saying be alert and be sober-minded, right? And so I thought, let's look that up. Let's see just what that means. Let's go to a dictionary definition. So sober-minded, guess what? It means just what it sounds like, right? To be sober-minded, to have a clear mind, a calm mind, a collected mind. Another word is temperate, where you're not given to extremes in any direction or easy movement in any direction. So to be sober-minded means you are in control. You're in control of your own faculties, not a foreign substance, not a chemical, but also not things like anger or fear, right? Sometimes we're not sober-minded, and it's not because of a chemical, it's because we're just so afraid that fear is controlling us, or anger is controlling us, or suspicion. So to be sober-minded is to be clear enough that you are in control of your own faculties. Then he goes further and he says, be alert. And that really just means give strict attention to be cautious, to be active. How many of you guys are ever paying attention, but you're not active, right? How many of you guys are doing it right now? That's why you're not raising your hand, right? And so we can be paying attention to something, but not being active. And so this is saying, listen, be active, be giving strict attention to take heed, lest through indifference, some destructive calamity may suddenly overtake you. Right? And so when you're being alert, you're watchful because something could creep up on you. Something could get you, right? When you're a kid, when you go to bed at night and you're afraid of the dark, you're alert. You notice everything, and you know where the monsters could come from, right? You've spotted them all. How many of you guys ran and you jumped like 5 feet from your bed because you knew that an arm was going to come out from the bottom and grab you? So you're airborne before they can get to you, right? And so you know where the dangers are, and you're avoiding those danger spots. And it's kind of laying that out as if that's how we live life. To live life knowing where the danger spots are so that we can avoid the danger. So the instruction is really clear. It's for us to be clear-minded and in control of our faculties, actively watching for an enemy who is plotting our ruin. Now, I don't know if you guys follow this, but I enjoy kind of keeping up with technology and stuff like that. And so some of you guys have been following the development of automated cars or autonomous cars, self-driving cars. And here's the thing. They're not market available yet, but there are companies that are testing cars that drive themselves. And if you're anything like me, that's terrifying, right? And so I can hurt myself well enough on my own. I don't need someone else's help, right? And so there's these automatic cars, and that's not available yet, but a lot of the features of those are already finding their way into cars, right? And some of you may have cars like that. And so there's cars that now, instead of cruise control, you just set the distance from the car in front of you, and your car will maintain that speed. So as long as you're in the lane, when the car in front of you speeds up, it speeds up. When it slows down, it slows down. When it stops suddenly, you die. And so when it stops suddenly, hopefully your car stops suddenly also. And it's got all these cameras on it, and it watches the lane lines, and it even keeps you in your lane. And so the truth is, I'm very against this technology, except for Alex, because Alex is not a very good driver. And so the computer is a better driver than Alex. For anyone else, you're better off in control. But here's the thing. It's not really driving. It's just watching these very limited things. And so as long as you stay in that lane, on that road, it's going to drive your car for you, right? Anything beyond that, it can't do. If there's any kind of risks beyond that, it can't mitigate those risks. It can only do these very limited things. And the reason I bring that up is that Peter is warning us here to be sober and alert, because we're tempted to be like those auto-driving car features. We're tempted to get a direction going in life, get in a lane, get in a direction, click a button, and let it take care of everything else, right? That's how we're tempted to live, to passively disengage from our lives, right? To disengage from our family. Like, I'm there, but I'm not there. To disengage from our job, right? How many of you guys ever shown up and like the whole day went by and you have no idea what you accomplished? I was there and I came home, right? And so, to disengage, even in conversations with our spouse. How many of you guys ever had whole conversations and you walked away and you I hope I didn't agree to anything because I don't remember anything we just talked about, right? And we just turn on autopilot, even in our walks with God, right? It's like, hey, I go to church on Sundays. If they accomplish something for me there, that's great. I'm not really engaged in this. We just kind of turn on autopilot and we disengage. Now, some of us we struggle with disengaging chemically. Come home at night, and it's just a nightly routine. We drink too much to take the edge of life off, when really what we're doing is we're not taking an edge off, we're not relaxing, we're disengaging. We're just kind of stepping back out of the scene a little bit and allowing autopilot to take over. Maybe we're actually getting high. We're smoking this, we're taking too many pills, we're doing that, we're using things excessively. And I'm not really here this morning to debate like the impact on the morality of legalization of marijuana, because the truth is, whether it's legal or not is kind of a completely secondary issue, right? There's a lot of things that are legal and still really harmful. There's a lot of things that are legal and are still going to pull you out of where you need to be in life. And so again, that's not the point. And when we get distracted sometimes by the wrong questions, we get the wrong answers. So the point is, here's what Peter is pleading with us for as followers of Jesus. He's pleading with us to be sober-minded and alert, because we have an enemy who's actually looking to devour us, right? So if you get into this metaphor all the way, how many of you guys would go on safari on the African plains with wild lions and choose to get high there? Why not? Let's have 5 or 6 glasses of wine like right then, right? Let's unwind every night around the fire. No, you wouldn't. Those lions would eat you, right? And he's saying, listen, you are constantly on safari. You've got an enemy who is prowling around constantly trying to devour you. And so please don't live life disengaged. Please don't live life tuned out, whether it's chemically or whether it's just through laziness, because the truth is there's more of us who are disengaged through laziness and disinterest than through chemicals. Right? And so however you're doing it, he's saying, listen, there's too much at stake. There's too much at stake to tune out and just go through life on autopilot. There's too much at stake to just leave it to chance. You see, the risk of a self-driving car is that it's really good at protecting you from a few pre-programmed things. Really, anything on the roadway they've thought of. Other cars, things like that. But the problem is it can't account for anything that takes place off of the roadway. So if you're driving, and you're in the right-hand lane, and there is a tree just off the road on the side, and it starts to fall, your self-driving car has no sensors to deal with that until it's down on the road in front of you. So if you're driving by, if you were in control, you would see the tree falling, right? Hopefully, unless you're checking your email, right? And so you would see the tree falling and you would stop before it came down and hit you. But on self-driving mode, until that hits your car doesn't know. Hopefully this never happens to you, but if you're driving on a highway and you go under a highway overpass and you see a young person standing there holding a cinder block over the edge of that bridge, you're going to stop. Before anything ever happens, before anything is dropped, you're going to go, that does not seem good. And you're going to turn out of the way. But if you're on self-driving mode, that your car isn't going to know until the moment that block crashes through your windshield. If you're driving on the road and there's a giant volcano erupting next to you, your car is not going to know until that lava actually flows in front of you and then kills you, okay? You see, your self-driving car can only account for or respond to things that are happening on the roadway and at that moment. So here's why I bring this up. Maybe you can keep up with the most basic demands of this physical life while disengaged. Maybe you can keep your job. Maybe you can keep the kids dressed and somewhat fed. Maybe you can keep your spouse from divorcing you, just barely. And maybe you can get through most days while disengaged. But that's just the basics of keeping it on the road. You can't account for any of these other things that may come in to the roadway. See, without being sober-minded and alert, you will never be able to respond to the things that are taking place behind the curtain. And as we mentioned, that's where our enemy primarily operates, is behind the curtain. And nothing touches the roadway in front of our sensors until the moment of impact. So just like the self-driving car cannot respond to threats off the roadway, it takes an extra level of alertness and sober-mindedness to respond to threats that are developing behind the curtain in your life. And that's why Ephesians 6:11 and 12 says, put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the powers and the rulers and against authorities in this dark world and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So he's saying, listen, there's a whole lot more than the physical stuff you see and you can touch. There's stuff that you can't see and that you can't touch, and it's just over here on the other side of the curtain, and that is what you are primarily up against. So guys, if we are only living with the natural world in focus, which is what we're doing if we're just disengaged, we're assuming that what we see and our patterns can account for is all there is. So if we're only living with the natural world in focus, then we're sitting ducks for Satan's schemes. And Paul is saying that there are things that even though they play out on this side of the curtain, they originate in the spiritual realm. And when we fail to see what's behind the curtain, we treat attacks as if they're just coincidental parts of life. See, if it's just a coincidental part of life, we don't respond to it. We don't prepare for it. We just keep going. It's like, oh, that happened. Oh, that's too bad. Oh, that happened. Oh, that's too bad. Oh, that happened. Oh, that's too bad, right? And see, when we fail to see the strategy that's being mounted against us, then we just wander blindly into danger. Guys, so many of us, we're like blindfolded fools stumbling around in an active battlefield, and then we marvel at the coincidence when we get shot. Like, oh, that hurt. I hope that doesn't ever happen again. Oh, that hurt. Right? How many times does that have to happen in our lives before we realize there is some concerted effort here? This is not a coincidence. This didn't just happen. I have an enemy who is plotting against me. He's roaming around like a hungry lion looking for someone to devour, and I've got a blindfold on. I'm just wandering through this, and he's chomping me a bite at a time, and I'm just letting him continue. And so I want to talk just for a few minutes about how our enemy actually works. Because our enemy's strategy is what I'm going to call circumstance exploitation. Our enemy's strategy is circumstance exploitation. That means that our enemy actively exploits circumstances that appear to be coincidental to hurt us and distance us from people and God. So he's going to use things that just look like they're just part of this normal thing around us, right? Because if an alien showed up and shot you in the face with a ray gun, you'd think there's something going on here, right? But if it looks normal, if it just looks like part of life, if it just looks like stuff that happens, then you'll continue and you'll let it happen again and again and again. So he uses things that appear to be circumstantial. So one of the most powerful books, and Jason alluded to this earlier, that I've ever read, and I think it's probably the most powerful book written in the last 100 years, is The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. I highly encourage all of you to get a copy. We only have like 50 copies here, so you'll have to move fast today. But get it online if you need to. Get it. I've read this book more times than I can count, and every time I read it, it is an eye-opening experience all over again, right? And so this book is really like a fictional series of letters between two demons, all right? And so it's an imaginary thing. It's not a theology of demons and how they actually work. It's C.S. Lewis. It's kind of like he also wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Aslan books. So this is kind of the other side of the spectrum. And so in this book, what he assumes is that there's an older, more experienced demon, and he's writing letters to a younger demon, and he's giving him training and tips on how to properly tempt and hurt and destroy his person, which he calls his patient. Okay? And so there's this series of letters back and forth as this demon is preparing this other demon for how to exploit the things in the ordinary life of this person to attack him and hurt him and drive him away from faith. And so I want to give you a few examples that he actually uses in the book to help us understand how our enemy uses circumstances. So there's one scene in the book where the person, the patient, is actually sitting somewhere thinking, and the demon can somehow perceive his thoughts, and he sees him thinking about a line of thought that would actually be the final coin in the slot that pushes him across the line of faith in Jesus. So the demon recognizes this guy is just a moment away from deciding to follow Jesus. And so he doesn't argue with the line of thinking. He doesn't try to debate it or suggest some other line of thinking. What he does is he says, man, it's 12:30. I'm hungry. And the person who goes, yeah, I'm hungry. I should have eaten by now. And then the demon is prepared for the fact that the very next thought is going to be, yeah, but this is important. I should keep thinking about this. And so the demon suggests the next thought. You're absolutely right. This is important. So important, you shouldn't think about this on an empty stomach. You should go eat, get your head clear, come back to it. And then he tells the younger demon, once you've done that, then all you got to do is get him to pay attention to something else during lunch, get him to pay attention to something else, and by the time he gets out the door, he'll have forgotten all about it again. For now, it's normal life being exploited against us. Then there's another example given where the person starts to go to church, and the demon says, listen, don't try to argue about the things being presented in church. Just get him to pay attention to all the wrong stuff. Get him to come in and notice how ridiculous someone is dressed. Get him to notice how badly someone sings. Get him to notice the person that he knows from outside of church, and he knows all the stupid things that person does. Get him thinking about that during the whole time so that he doesn't pay attention to anything else that's actually going on. Normal circumstances exploited by our enemy. Another example is that he has this group of friends that he's trying to guide his patient into friendship with. Because in this circumstance, these friends are like the smart, wealthy, cynical friends, and he feels like these friends may have all the right ideas to help insulate this guy against faith and help point out to him why faith is so silly and ridiculous. Normal things exploited. And finally, in another discussion, the demons are debating. This was set during World War II. So the demons are debating whether to make their man an extreme patriot or an ardent pacifist. And the demon says, listen, it doesn't matter the quality of either viewpoint. Either one is just as good. We can exploit either one equally. It just depends on him and his natural proclivity. So either one of these can be used to make him arrogant and angry and combative. So whichever one we can use to best isolate him from other people because of the pride that grows in people when they form such rigid stances. Again, something that we think is about this, and the enemy is using it to exploit it for something else. So here's the point, the reason I share these examples. Satan, your enemy, does not have a warehouse full of fundamentally evil weapons. Right? You guys remember the Road Runner and you know, and like everything it said Acme on it, you know, that's like the enemy's weapons, right? He didn't have like these weapons. There's like evil.com, right? He doesn't go to Amazon and have a special area in Amazon where he orders it and it just, right? He doesn't have a warehouse full of fundamentally evil weapons. Your enemy is always watching for an otherwise normal thing that he can exploit to accomplish his agenda. Your friends don't have to be evil to be exploited by the enemy to accomplish his agenda. Right? A situation, a job, an activity, a hobby, anything will do if we allow him to exploit it to accomplish his agenda. So certain friendships can pull you into behavior or thought patterns that just slowly and subtly nudge you away from faith and obedience to God. Activities, hobbies that take over our time and our focus, and we drift from church involvement, we drift from our devotional habits, we drift from our friendships with key Christians and things like that, and over time, they just nudge us further and further away. You see, your enemy is looking for things that he can use to move faith from the center of your life into the peripheral areas. And he does it very slowly and very subtly in small steps. And so I'm going to talk about his agenda, because when we learn to recognize his agenda, the trick is, since there's no weapon that he has that just says evil on it, it's hard to just look and go, is this evil or is this good? So we have to understand what his agenda is. So when we see his agenda taking place, then we know, oh, this may not be an evil thing, but my enemy is exploiting this right now against me. And so here, your enemy's agenda is to accomplish what I've called the 3 Ds, right? Division, distraction, and deception. Division, distraction, and deception. That is his agenda. So anytime you see these things going on in your life, I don't care what the circumstance is, I don't care what thing is causing them or prompting them, you know this is him at the wheel. This is him exploiting something to accomplish his agenda. If there's division, distraction, or deception. So we'll talk about division for just a minute. Because here's the thing, sometimes it's not, in fact, usually, it's not even a question of whether an idea is right or wrong. I want you to hear that. Sometimes the real issue is not whether this idea itself is right or wrong. Sometimes the real issue is the division that we allow this issue to cause. So you could be fighting for the right thing, but that could be accomplishing bad things in your heart and in your life. So, division inside the church and even just among people in general are seriously damaging, and we don't catch it. Here's 2 reasons. One is that the gospel of Jesus can only spread where there is personal relationship. You can put out stuff on Facebook all day long, you can do all that stuff, but at the end of the day, you can tell people things and you can raise some awareness and we can print materials, but at the end of the day, for Jesus to really be formed in someone's life is going to take a personal connection. The gospel can only be effectively spread through personal relationship. So your enemy is always at work trying to divide you from people, because the fewer people you have an active, good connection with, the fewer people are at risk to him for your spread of the gospel of Jesus. And then also the church. The church isn't a building. Right? When he attacks the church, he doesn't throw rocks through our windows. He divides you from the other people in this room. And sometimes you may be doing things that are causing that, and you don't even know it. You're posting things online. You don't know. You've just isolated yourself from 15 people in the church. Because you don't know. Things you say, things you do, right? So he's always at work trying to cause division, trying to isolate you and turn you into an island, because he can destroy your ability to share Jesus with people, and he can destroy the effectiveness of the church itself in your life if he can cut you off from personal connection to the church. Because I want you to understand, there's a few things that the church does, and when we get together and we worship Jesus, there's great power in that. When we get in this setting and we share God's word, there's great power in that. But the other third of this equation is what happens between all of you. God's plan is just as much for what happens between you guys as from what happens from this stage out into those seats. And oftentimes it's probably more. And so if he can disrupt that, then he's accomplishing his agenda, and he's neutering you and neutering the church in your life. You see, guys, if the enemy succeeds in dividing us from others, he can halt the advancement of the gospel, and he can tear up the church. So I want you to think for just a second. This is just one example. This isn't the whole point of this. But everyone, just because we're in a very divided political era, I want you to think about everyone you've ever argued politics with, whether it's online or in person. Everyone you've ever argued politics with in the last couple of years, understand this. In all likelihood, there is a lingering division between you and those people. You may deny it and say, no, we're still friends. But in your mind, you think those are the dumb people, right? Be honest. Those are the dumb ones. And you know what they think? You're one of the dumb ones. So do you think they're apt to change their eternal direction in life based on what you say? Nope. So there's this permanent division there, and you've effectively surrendered any influence you can ever have for Jesus in their lives over a political debate. See, you're identified with too much negative baggage now in their mind. And even though you may be friendly, you may talk, you may whatever, you're never going to have any significant voice in their life beyond that. And here's the scary thing is it's not just outsiders. There's all those same political divisions exist within this church. And so there's some of you that are weekly, daily, just reminding people of the division between you. And these are supposed to be Jesus in your life. And you're just constantly reinforcing that line. We'll move on. Guys, when Christians are duped into divisive behavior or divisive arguments, we are playing right into the hands of our enemy. I'll use that again. When Christians are duped into divisive behavior or divisive arguments, you're playing right into the hands of your enemy. And it's so sinister because he'll convince you that you're accomplishing good while you're doing it. So this isn't just group dynamics and politics, because division is hugely exploited in personal relationships also. In fact, this might be the most significant way. The enemy exploits misunderstandings. I want you to understand that. He's watching for things. He's watching for you to say things in a slightly wrong way so that he can prey on everybody else around you and go, "Did you hear what they said?" And you walk away, and I know that they said this and they meant this. And he's playing constantly on misunderstandings between you and other people. He's playing constantly and exploiting mistrust. And the most sinister of this is that he is playing on all of your insecurities. He knows them. He knows your insecurities. And he's causing people around you to say things and do things that hit that button. And then he's causing you to notice it. And he's causing the misunderstandings on top of that. And he's getting it all stirred up. And he's constantly causing and inflaming offense. Because it's a huge strategy to bring division. And that's why Paul talks about this in Ephesians 4:26, and he's so clear. He says, in your anger, do not sin. He's just assuming you're going to be angry, right? Because why? Because everyone's dumb, okay? And so not just you, everyone else too. And so in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. And then this, do not give the devil a foothold. I want you to understand something. Paul is not the least bit concerned in this passage with whose fault it is. There's no mention of it. Whose fault it is completely irrelevant as it applies to how the devil will exploit offense. Fault is irrelevant. Some of you need to tweet that, right? As it applies to how the devil will exploit offense, fault is irrelevant. Paul is warning us that how we interact with other people can actually play into Satan's strategy, and it can give him an advantage over us. That's why he says, don't give the devil a foothold. So get this, a dumb argument that I have with some person could actually be part of Satan's strategy to utterly destroy that person spiritually. Guys, if we're not super careful in this area of life of division, we can be continually doing the devil's work for him. Number 2, distraction. So there's division, there's distraction. In our current age, I think distraction is one of the things that is most exploited against us because of our age of technology and all the things that we have at our fingertips. So, if you want to keep yourself from ever really hearing the voice of God, distraction is a great way to do it. There are so many things that we use now to fill empty space in our brains, right? So we have cell phones, we have TVs, we have computers, we have constant social media available. How many of you guys are in more than like 3 social medias right now, right? And you just got to go from social media, you got to update, I got to update my Twitter, I got to update my Instagram, I got to update Facebook, I don't know the rest of them. But anyway, you're just always, and so I know how it works. You look at one, everything's boring on the one, so you go, okay, there's nothing going on Facebook, let's check Instagram. There's nothing going on Instagram, let's check what, and you just go from thing to thing to thing to thing. You're just filling time while you got yourself driving car on the freeway. Anyway, and so you're just doing that. And here's something that I've noticed from myself. When I put it all down, which you try to do on a regular basis, when you put it all down, if I just put it down for 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 4 minutes, I don't notice any difference. My brain is still swirling, still distracted. I'm still thinking about a million different things. You know, it's just, right? There's just noise. But if I'll put it all down, turn it all off, push it all away, get quiet for 10 or 15 minutes, it takes some discipline to do, but after about 10 or 15 minutes, something begins to change. Anybody ever notice this? You ever do it for long enough? You ever turn off the noise for long enough? Something will begin to change after 10 or 15 minutes. Suddenly, your mind is able to focus on things that really matter. All the silly and inconsequential things kind of fall aside, and you're focused on what really matters. And often, when I'll do that, I'll actually have a moment of clarity about a situation in my life that needs to change. And the truth is, that's why so many of us gladly welcome the noise, because we know what needs to change, and we don't really want to face it. We'll keep the noise there so we don't have to think about it. But if we'll do it, if we'll get to that place where clarity happens, often in those moments of clarity, that's when I get these really revolutionary and novel ideas, right? That's when I suddenly understand what's really going on with my kids, and I'm able to address it and not just treat symptoms. That's when I have clarity about what's really going on in my marriage, and I can address it. That's when I have clarity about what's really going on personally in the church, and I can address it and stop chasing little side details. Because God speaks, and clarity comes when I finally get undistracted. Right? So when I was a kid in grade school, I had this one teacher who had a very small voice, all right? And when the class would get unruly, instead of raising her voice and talking over us, she would just fall silent. And she would get this weird look. And she would wait. And eventually, it would get awkward. And people would stop. And then she would continue. That's what God does. God will not compete with the distraction in your life. And when you get all that stuff swinging around, He'll just get that look. And He'll wait. And for some of us, it takes months. And tragedy. And heartache. And then we finally go, whoa, what am I doing? But He'll wait. He will not compete with the distraction in your life. And here's the trick. Your enemy knows that. Your enemy knows that your Father in heaven will not compete with the distraction. And he will use then any distraction that will allow him to. He will keep our lives and our schedules and our minds so busy that God simply falls silent, waiting for us to desire again to hear His voice. And so I want to just give you a side note on this, and this is just me watching one group of people for the last 20 years almost and seeing patterns, all right? Just a side note on distraction. Over the years, I've watched as countless people have slowly drifted out of relationship with the church, and it's because of busyness in their schedule. And so what happens is over time, they just inadvertently shelf God without even noticing it. And it always starts off subtly and small, and it just grows and it grows. It starts with things like kids' sports schedules, working extra shifts, various other commitments in life, going to the lake all the time or being on the boat every weekend, and all these things. And what happens is for a while we say, oh, I really miss being there, and we're going to get there when we can. And for a while we get there when we can, but then what happens is this thing continues to take up more space in our lives. And so then even when we're not doing this, then we're having to do all the other details of life that have gotten pushed out as well. And so pretty soon, before long, what happens is that your church involvement and even that close personal relationship that you have with God, it eventually becomes something that you used to do and that you plan to do again when things calm down. Guys, I cannot tell you how many people I've watched as they slowly get distracted and get busied out of a vibrant relationship with God. And I want you to understand this. This is not intended to use guilt to somehow reinforce church attendance. I just want you to see the reality of what's actually going on, to see behind the curtain that when the details of life are competing with your connection to the church and they're competing with your connection to God, that is likely not coincidental. You have an enemy who exploits normal situations to accomplish his ends. Those things, the distractions themselves, they're not evil. But if we allow it, he'll exploit otherwise good things. And so we have to find ways to have things in our lives and not allow them to be exploited as distractions. And the final thing is deception. The last D. Deception tends to be a secondary attack after division and distraction do their work. So understand that he usually can't deceive you when you're still locked in. He can't deceive you when you're connected to all kinds of really sharp Christian friends. He can't deceive you when you're hearing the truth all the time, when you're reading the truth daily in Scripture. He can't do that. You're too connected to the truth. So deception is a secondary attack after you've been divided and after you've been distracted. You see, once we've allowed division with people and with groups, we're more vulnerable for the enemy to fill our heads with lies about those people that we're divided from. So we start thinking about people in darker and darker ways. And then he steadily fills our heads with more and more deception. And we get filled then with anger and pride and even hatred. And that's why some of you get so angry when you see political arguments from the other side. Because your enemy has so deceived your heart about those people that now you're filled with pride on your own intelligence and your own rightness and anger for people and even hatred. Because division has done its work and now you're thoroughly deceived about where you actually stand. You see, guys, once deception begins, it becomes increasingly difficult to overcome because the image of the people that we're now dealing with is not real. It's a caricature. It's been fed to us by our enemy. And so now you're dealing with this thing that doesn't even exist in real life. And that's why these arguments can continue to go on and nothing ever changes because neither side is dealing with real people on the other side. We're all dealing with fake, made-up caricatures that are so ridiculous and so grotesque. And that's why we're just talking right past each other all the time. That's actually how racism and other forms of hatred continue because we're continually responding to an imaginary person in our heads. And the real people around us are unable to rewrite that image because we're deceived and we're now reacting more all the time to our stereotype in our minds than we are actual people. So we've been divided and then we've been deceived. And it's not just group dynamics. It's on an individual level too. The enemy will deceive you about individuals and he will make them darker and darker in your mind so that the division from them is more and more permanent. And you guys have all experienced this. You have a falling out with someone and you don't talk to them for a little while. And what begins to happen? You begin to discover all these things about them that you didn't know before, right? And so it happens. You start learning the facts, and it reinforces your dislike for them. And you start to think, man, that was painful, but I'm glad it happened because I didn't realize they were as messed up as they are. Right? And you get more and more ironed into your dislike of them, and even, you wouldn't call it hatred because the Bible talks about hatred, but you'd call it something else. And we get more and more ironed into it because the devil is filling our hearts and our heads with more and more deception because his plan is to divide you, and then by the deception to make that permanent, to iron it in and to lock it in. And so the more we allow distraction to bring distance, we're moving on. Now, the more we allow distraction to bring distance into our relationship with God, the more prone we are to real deception in our beliefs about God. So in the same way that we get divided from people and then we get deceived, as we get distance between us and God, we become prone for the devil to sow deception into our understanding of God. You see, as that happens, it becomes easier and easier for broken societal ideas to take root in our life. And then the way the culture is talking about things seems to make more and more sense. And it's easier and easier to believe and easier to fall into those patterns because we've got enough distance now that we're beginning to believe lies. So the process of division and distraction actually cut the anchors that we have in our relationship to God, right? And so they cut the anchors that are holding us to the reality of who God is and what he really says. And so as division and distance creep in, Satan can slowly replace the truth of who God is with lies. As distance and division creep in, he can replace the truth about how God feels about you with lies. And you'll begin to believe God's angry at me. God hates me. God, I'm not good enough. And so as that distance increases, he's replacing the truth with lies. As the distance and division increase, he replaces the truth about what the church is with lies. And so as you get more and more distance from the church, you begin to remember, and he highlights in your mind the silly and the dumb and the judgmental people, the shallow people. And he completely erases the sea of people who are full of love and grace and concern. And you get so far away that you believe the lie. And you go, that church was just full of this anyway. That church was just full of that anyway. Those people are just this. They're just that. But when you're not distracted or divided, all of these lies, they seem so obvious. Right? When you're not distracted or divided, the lies, they seem obvious, but as distance and division do their work, I'm telling you, deception takes over. So, we're almost done. As we move closer, toward closing here, I want to point out again what Paul said. He said, don't give a foothold to the enemy. And this is kind of foreign language to us because it's built on the analogy of walled cities. Back then, cities had walls, and walls had gates, and that kept you safe from robbers and plunderers. And so if you lived inside of a walled city, you could have a livelihood. You could sell goods. You could do all that because at night, no one could come and steal all your stuff because they closed the city gates, and you were walled in from all of the outsiders who would come and do you harm, right? And so here's the problem, though, is if you were one of those people who were on the outside wanting to do harm, you would come up to the walls at night once everyone was asleep. You'd take a little hammer and you'd start pecking at the mortar on the rocks, and you'd pull out a rock and then not do anything else. And you'd come back weeks later and you'd peck on a rock just above that one. You'd pull out a rock, and now you got 2 footholds. And you come back later and you'd peck out another rock and you pull it out. And as you do that subtly over time, no one notices. Just looks like the wall needs maintenance. And eventually, over time, you've turned a wall into a ladder. And once you pull out enough footholds, you can go in and out of the city at night while everybody's asleep. You can rob everybody blind and maybe even kill. And that's what Paul is warning us, is that when we allow division and distraction and ultimately deception, we're allowing for our enemy to pull all these little footholds out of our lives, and we're enabling our enemy to scale the walls and to steal and even destroy us. And so maybe you're thinking, like, come on, isn't this a little bit dramatic? But I want you to understand the battle against your enemy is won or lost very slowly and in small increments. You see, our enemy is sly, and he's slow as to not alert us to his presence. I don't know if you know this, but at the church here we have a burglar alarm, right? Not a burger alarm. I'd love a burger alarm. But we have a burglar alarm. And so we set it when we leave, and it lets us know if someone tries to break in. Now here's the thing. They thought about the fact that some of you might be sneaky and go into a bathroom and wait for us to leave and then set the alarm, and then you're inside. And so it's got motion detectors in all the big spaces. I'm giving away too many secrets here in case you guys want to come back and steal stuff. But the motion detectors can only detect motion at a certain speed. So if you move slowly enough, you can move through the entire building and never set off a motion detector alarm. And so if you're committed, it would take days, right? And I'm here, so I'll catch you, right? So if you were committed to moving slowly enough, it would take days, but you could move around the entire building collecting all of the valuables, right? And it's just pictures of me. That's the only valuable thing here. And so you could collect all the valuables and get them staged by the door so that you're ready, so you could grab them all and walk out, and by the time the alarm goes off, you're in the clear. And that's what our enemy does. He works slowly and subtly to get everything staged so that by the moment you're tipped off of his work, he's out the door and gone with all the loot. And that's why C.S. Lewis in that book that we've been talking about, Screwtape Layers, he says this: the safest road to hell is the gradual one. The gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, and without signposts. Guys, our enemy is subtle. And so I don't say all this today to freak you out, because the truth is, overwhelming victory is available through Jesus. 1 John 4:4 says, the one that's in you is greater than the one that's in the world. So your enemy is no match for the Spirit of God living in you, but you have to engage in the fight. You have to be sober-minded and alert. You have to recognize that you have an enemy who exploits things all around you to move you slowly and subtly away from your Father in heaven, to divide you from people around you, to distance you from your Father in heaven, and ultimately to deceive you. But it's so easy to miss if you're not alert. But it's so easy to spot once you know his game. And that's the whole purpose of today, is for us to pull this curtain back so we can see the strategy. We can see it. And now when you're watching, when you're alert, you're going to see it all over your life. You're going to go, oh, I see you there. Boom, right? It's so easy to win when you understand what the game is. You see, your enemy would like nothing more than for you to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But once you peel it back and you gain a real understanding of what's going on back there, you are most of the way toward real change and victory. Just understanding it. Let's pray. Father, help us. Help us, God, because the truth is that overwhelming victory is ours. What Jesus accomplished for us in his death and his resurrection guarantees the fight to us. But we need you. We need to be engaged. We need to be alert. We need to be sober-minded. We need to be really watching this thing and really living this thing, not tuned out, not on autopilot. So God, help us. I love that your word tells us there's now no condemnation for those who are in Jesus. So even today, as we've been walking through this, I know some of us are like, oh, I'm so terrible. I'm so bad. I've done this. I've done that. But there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. The past is the past. God, help us to start today to live sober-minded and alert and to not fall into the traps of the division and the distraction and the distance and the deception. Help us to live above and beyond that through the victory you've already won for us through Jesus. And we give you thanks for that in Jesus' name. Amen. Guys, God bless you. Have a great week. We'll see you.